Evening. Thanks for joining us. The former warden of the Waupun Correctional Institution charged with misconduct in office appears in Dodge County Court this afternoon.
Randall Hepp pled not guilty to those charges during the hearing. This comes the day after a fifth inmate was found dead at the prison, with the other four deaths coming under Hepp's watch. Two other former staffers at the prison also appearing for arraignments today. Sarah Ransbottom and Jamal Russell also pleading not guilty in the case.
Jason Zimmerman was there as the former warden's hearing unfolded. Tonight he's in Juneau with a first alert update.
The judge did not allow cameras inside the courtroom for today's hearing, which lasted only a few minutes. Hepp faces a felony charge filed back in June after an investigation by the Dodge County Sheriff's Department. After the hearing, we tried to speak with the former warden as he left the courtroom. He wouldn't take any questions as he passed our camera, walking from the building to the parking lot and then driving off. Some family members of those who died at the prison were also on hand, but they too declined to speak with us. Hepp and 8 members of his staff were charged with various felonies, including misconduct and inmate abuse, tied to the passing of 2 inmates at the prison since 2023. One of the inmates died of a stroke and the other died of dehydration, according to court documents. Hepp retired in June. At this point, no charges have been filed in connection to the 2 other prisoners who passed away within the past year. The death announced on Monday of 57-year-old Christopher McDonald, which was reported by the prison, appears to be a suicide, according to investigators. Hepp is due back in court for further proceedings on September 20th. We will first alert you as we receive any new details. Reporting in Juneau, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.